to the town of Brookline's annual celebration of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. There he is, larger than life. Today's program honors Dr. King, the man, but also serves as an opportunity for all of us to consider and examine the progress or the lack of progress which we have made in forever eliminating the barriers of racial difference. If there's an unofficial theme for today's program, it's let's not congratulate ourselves just yet. While we have come far since the freedom marches of the early 1960s, we have not come all the way. We have not reached the mountaintop which Dr. King metaphorically set our sights on. The last slopes of that mountaintop are perhaps the most difficult to conquer. The subtle, even subconscious biases which continue to prevent a perfectly inclusive society. In Brookline this past year, we have struggled to make progress up that final ascent. There are those who argue strongly that Brookline remains a community where people of color do not necessarily feel welcome. They point to the fact that Brookline Town's government has no Black or Latino department heads, or elected selectmen, or elected school committee members, as a stain on our racial record. And most citizens of this town concur with that conclusion, even if they differ with the correct course of remediation. I refer each of you to the town's third annual report on workforce inclusion and diversity, which is available online at the town's website for a detailed metric of the racial makeup of the town and its workforce. To find the report, go to brooklinema.gov under the department drop box that says Human Resources, and then click on Diversity and Inclusion. I know that I speak for the entire Board of Selectmen when I say that we will continue to work toward complete diversity and inclusion in our workforce and in the community at large, toward the elimination of racial bias in any form, and toward the day when that report that I just spoke to can be considered obsolete. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge my fellow Board of Selectmen members, our Chairwoman Betsy DeWitt, Nancy Daly, Dick Banker, and Neil Wyshynski. I'd also like to introduce State Representative Frank Smisek, who's here today. Frank, why don't you raise your hand and show us. Also, Town Administrator Mel Kleckner, who's been a valuable member of this committee. Mel, where are you? He's still in operations, I think. I make these introductions not just to honor these individuals, although they certainly are worthy of honor, but also so that you know who they are, so that you can communicate with them as this dialogue continues. Planning today's event is not just a matter of logistics and schedules. Our program today was planned by a team of individuals who are deeply concerned with the vision of Dr. King. There is no aspect of this program which does not try to honor Dr. King's vision. And I must relate my sincere thank you to the members of that planning committee. Bobby Nabel, where are you, Bobby? Wave to us. Rob Daves, Rita McNally, Betsy Shore-Gross, Larry Oney, Lynette Glover, hi Lynette, Malcolm Cawthorn, who I'll introduce to you in just a few moments. He's going to take over this podium for me, and I promise just a few more seconds. Lloyd Jeleno, the town's Human Services Administrator, and Rebecca Joachim, the newest member of Lloyd's team, who I got to say brought some youth and some fresh inspiration to the project, and Mel Kleckner, who I've already mentioned. A few more thank yous and acknowledgments. Mark Anastasio and Nick from the entire staff of the Coolidge Corner Theater, who make this wonderful venue available to us free of charge, and who never cease to support this community. Our three high school a cappella groups, Perfect Pitch, featuring, at least in my mind, Ella Bonnell, I don't know if Ella's here. Notify, the Testosterone, who you'll hear from soon, featuring again in my mind, Dwan Hardy. I've mentioned these guys who shout out to them who I'm closest to. And they will inspire as well as entertain us. Also, music director from the high school, Michael Driscoll. Our keynote speaker is Reverend Elizabeth Walker, who will be gracing our stage very shortly. Tim Sullivan, the town printer who printed the program, educational handout and flyers. By the way, that educational handout that you got at the front door is a take-home. That's not to discard quickly. That has some very important history and thinking on the themes of this day, and I commend it all to your attention. Thank you also to Kristen Leder, who did the design work for the flyer and the program. Thank you to Brookline Access Television for covering the event, to the Brookline Tab, and all the merchants who posted flyers, and to Chobe Hoy Associates for donating banner space in their Tab display ad. Also, we have some game day volunteers: Elena Goldstein, Jillian Goldstein, Jason Kleckner, and Jacob Nabel. In some cases, the word volunteers might be used loosely. Finally, thank you to all of you for your presence here today and for realizing that Martin Luther King Day is not just a day off, but a day to reflect on the promise. Thank you. And now I'll introduce Malcolm Cawthorn. Malcolm's a Brookline resident, a Brookline High School graduate, and he now teaches history at that same school. I can't think of anyone in the entire world more qualified to guide us through this celebration and examination. Mr. Cawthorn.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, committee, for allowing me to MC this wonderful event again. It is truly one of my annual joys. I've been quite reflective about those who gave so much to make this a better world and challenged the establishment of racial practices of imperial and supremacist power. In honor of the recent deaths of Nelson Mandela and Amri Baraka, who carried activism to heightened levels of urban and international awareness, I would like us to take a moment of silence to remember these two beacons of equality, if you would. Thank you. Dr. Martin Luther King evokes many thoughts and memories that are becoming more and more distant as we enter a new millennium and get farther from the golden age of the civil rights movement. For children, Dr. King represents many things great. However, much of those have become sound bites and call signs to connect to a march or a nonviolent protest. The greatest concern is that it has become easy for people to think the issues of prejudice and injustice and access to things are only things in history books, that we in this town can believe there aren't disparities amongst racial, economic, gender, sexual orientation, or age lines. The reality is that there's much to do to keep the promise in Brookline. There's much struggle in front of us as a community if we hope to be leaders in true diversity. It means through self-reflection that we will come to conclusions that we don't like, conclusions that we can't explain, and, more scary, conclusions we can explain. Within this deduction, Dr. King challenged us to challenge each other. There will be awkward and uncomfortable moments, revelations that will require the combined work of a community to resolve our shortcomings. Dr. King also gives me faith in our own humanity. I moved to Brookline in 1973 as a part of my parents' dream of raising their children outside of urban decay and segregated schools. I choose to live in Brookline so that my children could have opportunities that they may not have gotten elsewhere. I choose to work here because I believe in the town's potential. We have a special place that has cherished all that is right on its surface. I believe we can give that vision depth, sincerity, and reality. It is what makes me so proud to be here today as we come together as a community in the name of Dr. King, his values, and the overlap of his values with ours. It is the foresight of Dr. King. It is the foresight of Dr. King's reminder that we all have a mountaintop to reach. It is the reminder that we should all be judged by the content of our character. It is the promise that the Bank of Justice isn't bankrupt. It is the struggle of our religious and community leaders to stand up for all God's children and politically speak for all its citizens. It is the promise our little black boys and black girls play on the playgrounds with little white boys and white girls. But not only that our ever-expanding racial and interracial groupings become represented in all aspects of Brookline culture, from AP and honors courses to local government and home ownership. It is with these ideals we honor Dr. King today, his promise and his struggles for the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that we are guaranteed by the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is why we are here today. With that, one of the most important aspects of the civil rights movement was its music. Music was an uplifting factor amongst those marching, protesting, and standing up for the rights they knew were guaranteed to themselves. Music helped folks unify and encourage as they faced mobs that threatened hatred and violence towards their American protests. Today, we have the a cappella groups from Brookline High School to share the value of music to our souls. The first group we want to welcome is Notify, who has braved a bit of a bug that's running through Brookline High School. They're a little, I guess, underwomaned at this point, but they're ready to go, the young women who are here. And they will be coming up to perform Blackbird by Paul McCartney and Stand By Me by Benny King. Please give a round of applause for Notify. What talented children we have in Brookline. These singers have helped remind us of the struggle. Today, sometimes it's hard to convey the power of organization and protest to generations who weren't there, including myself. It hangs like a relic in United States history, like the Boston Tea Party, the Civil War, or Pearl Harbor. At Brookline High School, kids every year take a trip, a sojourn to the past, to meet people from the civil rights movement, to hear their stories and testimonies, to walk the steps of the civil rights protests and study this golden era for equality. Members of past trips, as well as members of this year's sojourn trip, are here to read words from the civil rights movement and reflections of the progress or lack of progress that we have made. As students will be reading, please pay attention to the graphic that will be on the screen in conjunction with the words being spoken by the students. The first group of students, we're quite grateful for one stepping in extremely last moment, but Catherine Fleming and Taylor James will come up as they will read words from Dr. King and Marion Wright Edelman.
Each of you students are in the process of building the structure of your lives, and the question is whether you have a proper, a solid, and a sound blueprint. Number one in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your worth, and your own somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel that you're nobody. Always feel that you count. Always feel that you have worth, and always feel that your life has ultimate significance. Secondly, in your life's blueprint, you must have as the basic principle the determination to achieve excellence in your various fields of endeavor. You're going to be deciding as the years go by, what you will do in life, what your life's work will be. Set out to do it well. And I say to you, my young friends, doors are opening to you, doors of opportunities that were not open to your mothers and your fathers. And the great challenge facing you is to be ready to face these doors as they open. This hasn't always been true, but it will become increasingly true. And so I would urge you to study hard, to burn the midnight oil. I would say to you, don't drop out of school. I understand all of the sociological reasons, but I urge you that in spite of your economic plight, in spite of the situation that you're forced to live in, stay in school. Education has a twofold function to perform in the life of man and in society. The one is utility and the other is culture. Education must enable a man to become more efficient, to achieve with increasing facility the legitimate goals of his life. The function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education that stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but with no morals. We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of education. The complete education gives one not only power of concentration, but worthy objectives upon which to concentrate. The broad education will, therefore, transmit to one not only the accumulated knowledge of the race, but also the accumulated experience of social living. Historically, to keep Negroes in oppression, they were deprived in education. In slave days, it was illegal to teach a slave to read or write. With the ending of slavery and the emergence of quasi-freedom, Negroes were only partially educated, sufficient to make their work efficient, but insufficient to raise them to equality. It is precisely because education is the road to equality and citizenship that it has been made more elusive for Negroes than many other rights. The walling off of Negroes from equal education is part of the historical design to submerge them in second-class status. Therefore, as Negroes have struggled to be free, They have had to fight for the opportunity for a decent education. The richest nation on earth has never allocated enough resources to build sufficient schools, to compensate adequately its teachers, and to surround them with the prestige their work justifies. We squander funds on highways, on the frenetic pursuit of recreation, on the overabundance of overkill armament, but we pauperize education. In the treatment of poverty nationally, one fact stands out. There are twice as many white poor as Negro poor in the United States. Up to recently, we have proceeded from a premise that poverty is a consequence of multiple evils: lack of education restricting job opportunities, poor housing which stultified home life and suppressed initiative, fragile family relationships which distorted personality development. The logic of this approach suggested that each of these causes be attacked one by one. Hence, a housing program to transform living conditions, improved educational facilities to furnish tools for better job opportunities, and family counseling to create better personal adjustments were designed. In combination, these measures were intended to remove the causes of poverty. At no time has a total, coordinated, and fully adequate program been conceived. As a consequence, fragmentary and spasmodic reforms have failed to reach down to the profoundest needs. In addition to the absence of coordination and sufficiency, the programs of the past all have another common failing. They are indirect. Each seeks to solve poverty by first solving something else. I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed measure, the guaranteed income. We are likely to find that the problems of housing and education, instead of preceding the elimination of poverty, will themselves be affected if poverty is first abolished. Thank you.
Once upon a time, America professed to believe in strong public education system, at least for some children. And we still talk about public education as the great equalizer and pathway out of poverty, but continue to fall short in assuring millions of poor children, especially those of color, upward mobility. Children cannot eat rhetoric, and commissions cannot shelter them. I don't want to see another commission that studies the needs of kids. We need to help them. As if children and families were not suffering enough during this economic downturn, many states are choosing to balance budgets on the backs of children and to shift more costs away from government onto children and families. Even when students are in school, they're getting less than they used to. 37 states are providing less funding per student to local school districts this school year than they provided last year. And 30 are providing less funding than they did 4 years ago. 17 states have cut per student funding, more than 10% from pre-recession levels, and 4 have reduced per student funding by more than 20%. These education cuts come at a time when American education is in a civil rights struggle. More than 60% of all 4th, 8th, and 12th grade public school students in every racial and income group are reading or doing math below grade level. Nearly 80% or more of Black and Hispanic students in these grades are reading or doing math below grade level. A recent report notes more than 1 in 5 high school student graduates don't meet the minimum standard required for Army enlistment, as measured by the Armed Forces qualification tests, among applicants of color. The ineligibility rates, I'm so sorry, just not coming, are even higher. 29% of Hispanics and 39% of African Americans are ineligible based on their Armed Forces qualification tests. The legacies that parents and church and teachers left to my generation of Black children were priceless, but not material. A living faith reflected in daily service, the discipline of hard work and stick-to-itiveness, and the capacity to struggle the face of adversity. Children should be getting more quality instructional time, not less, to prepare to compete in rapidly globalizing economy. Instead, they're being held back and provided less school days and hours by stopgap solutions to budget problems they didn't cause. Too many adults seem to lack a moral, common, and fiscal sense context for making decisions about what to cut and what to invest in. The Children's Defense Funds documented 2 million children not enrolled in school, including hundreds of thousands of children with disabilities in 1974. As we went door to door interviewing thousands of families in the 30 census tracts for that initial study, we never thought to ask the question, is your child home today because her school is closed to help balance your district's budget? It's unthinkable in the richest nation on earth that we let this happen, this becoming the new apartheid. A top priority of the Children's Defense Funds is to dismantle America's cradle to prison pipeline crisis that leaves a black boy born in 2001 with a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison in his lifetime. More than 5 times the odds for a white boy born in that same year. The cradle to prison pipeline is a trajectory that leads to marginalized lives, imprisonment, and often premature death. The United States of America does not provide a level playing field for all children, and our nation does not value and protect all children's lives equally. The cradle to prison pipeline is fueled by racial disparities, pervasive poverty, inadequate health and mental health care gaps in early childhood development, disparate educational opportunities, chronic abuse and neglect, and overburden in effective juvenile justice systems. Zero-tolerance school discipline policies are a key feeder system into the pipeline to prison, and it play a significant role in fueling the dropout crisis, which adds to the odds that already stacked against children. They have increased the use of expulsion and suspension disciplinary practices for the minor offenses such as tardiness. Research has shown that there is little evidence that zero-tolerance policies improve school climate or discipline. To the contrary, there's evidence that this kind of punishment is inappropriate for youth whose brains or cognitive judgment are still developing. Zero-tolerance school discipline policies are disproportionately impact students of color. The very students disproportionately fed into the criminal justice system. Zero tolerance is a compelling flashpoint that represents the deeper injustice of the cradle to prison pipeline. Zero tolerance school discipline policies and arrest and criminalization of children at younger and younger ages for behaviors once handled by schools and community institutions overwhelm and break apart already fragile young lives. We believe education is a basic human right and an essential tool for evening the odds for all children and promoting upward mobility for children left behind. Education gives you the tools to improve not only your own life, but the lives of others and to leave the world better than you found it. How can we expect our children to create a better America if we do not give them a good education? Cuts being proposed in Washington, in the states and localities around the country may be saving a few dollars on a balance sheet today, but they will cost us dearly tomorrow as a nation. How short-sighted are we where our priorities? What are our values? The future we hold and trust for our own children will be shaped by our fairness to other people's children. Thank you.
And so hopefully you're able to observe that with the graphic. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Catherine. And so one of the things, as we move along, this idea of seeing that graphic in the light of the fact that we have progressed with many more high school graduates, but still have struggle in front of us and struggle to fight. As a teacher, There's nothing more motivating than to hear our children speak about the weaknesses of our own educational system. And watching our children represent themselves, our history, and our school system shows how much potential we have in our own hands. One of the things as we look to move forward is to recognize that potential in all of our high school kids. And so hopefully we will get an example today with all this potential here. One of the things as we lead in today is we're going to speak about a woman who has maximized that potential, okay? And this is our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is someone I first met in my living room. As a young boy growing up on Babcock Street, I remember with oddity and pride as Liz Walker came into my home via television most weekdays. For a black kid in a town that didn't have very many folks who looked like me, this was rare enough for me to immediately notice a black anchor woman. And despite my young age, it was rare enough for me to feel proud that we, Boston, had a black anchor woman. Because of hard work and excellence in journalism, Reverend Walker has won 2 Emmy Awards, an Edward R. Murrow Award, and has received special recognition from the prestigious Gabriel Awards for her on-air and documentary work. As an adult, I became equally impressed and proud to learn of her activism on issues ranging from homelessness to women's rights, to education and at-risk youth issues, to African liberation, and many other causes. As founder of the Walker Group, she produces and hosts the Better Living Health series. She serves on many boards and foundations, including the Jane Doe Fund to help women who have suffered from domestic violence, and the United Nations International Children's Education Fund. Currently, she is pastor-elect at Roxbury Presbyterian Church. Please give a warm welcome for our keynote speaker, Reverend Liz Walker.
I just walked out. That was amazing timing, so thank you very much. I am delighted and honored to be here in Brookline, particularly for this event, this evening, this afternoon. For many reasons, we have to continue to remember. We have to remember what inspires us, because we forget at our own peril. And I'm here and excited to be here because this is my home. My son was born here. I raised him here. He is a student of the Brookline Public Schools. And so even though I've moved recently, my heart is always here. I still shop here. I still work out here. I have my coffee here. So Brookline indeed is my home. I loved hearing the beautiful music, listening to the young women remind us what's at stake about education. But I thought I'd speak to you this afternoon about something a little different. I want to talk to you about a theory I'm working on in my life. I call it practicing grace. Practicing grace. Because every political step we take, every social step we take, every revolution that we participate in has to start in the heart. And so I'd like to share with you my thoughts on grace. I have discovered grace in the last 12 years of my life when I started working in humanitarian work in South Sudan. I went on a story there to cover some Bostonians who were investigating allegations of slavery, and the experience changed my life, and I learned about grace. Now, we tend to think about grace as a religious word. And you're sitting there going, Lord, is she going to do a sermon? Because that's not what we called her here for, and I promise you I'm not. It is one of those words that we maintain and keep inside churches. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul told us that God's grace is sufficient. God's grace is an outpouring of God's love. But there's more to it. Grace in Islam is fadi, which means surplus. Grace, as I understand it in Judaism, is khen, which means to bend in or be inclined toward. I would argue that grace goes way beyond religion. It's something that we can actually do. It's not like the word love. We have kind of messed up love, right? Love was supposed to mean something amazing and wonderful, but we have turned it into something trivial. I love ice cream. I love you. I love the Red Sox. I love the world. We don't have a clue what love is really all about. Some of us think that love is power. Some of us think it's submission. We think it's desire. We think it's sex. We have really kind of messed up love. But grace, oh, grace holds its own. There's something about that word. Author Philip Yancey writes that grace is our last best word. It has wonderful potential. We talk about a grace period. Well, they used to give us grace periods in stores. Well, that's some extra time. Or you give gratuity. That's a little extra tip. Gracious people are accommodating people and beautiful people. So grace always is something a little bit more. Think about a time when you were absolutely at the end of your rope and someone reached out to you. That's grace. Otis Redding, back in the day, had a song called Try a Little Tenderness. Y'all are too young to remember that, but those of you who remember black and white TV when I started, those of you who remember when TV only had 3 channels, those of you who remember when you actually had to get up and go change those bad boys, you may remember Try a Little Tenderness. My definition of grace I discovered on the road in Jamaica Plain. Like I said, I used to live in Brookline. Now I live in Jamaica Plain. And if you ever go through Jamaica Plain, there is the Jamaica Way. It is a curvy, beautiful road that probably was at its peak in the 1900s, but has outlived its usefulness now. I assure you it is not made for the amount of traffic that takes on that road. And so if you live in Jamaica Plain, you are very, very aware of the Jamaica Way. And I live right off it, right across from the pond. And generally there are wrecks and there are collisions and you hear ambulances because people are just going too fast and the road just can't hold the amount of traffic. And when I have to drive out, I come off of a street where there's no light. So I have to get on the Jamaica Plain thanks to the people who are driving it. They have to slow down and let me in. And there's nothing that tells them to do that except grace. So you're sitting there in your car and the traffic is going. And let me tell you, most people on the Jamaica Way are angry. I don't know why. Maybe they don't like their jobs. Maybe I don't know what the problem is. But I've started to study the people on the Jamaica Way. So I'm in my car and clearly I want to get in the traffic. And the guy is driving, and you know what? He just won't look at me. Or the woman looks the other way, or somebody will look at me and flip the bird, but nobody wants to let me in. So that person that finally just slows down and lets me in, that's grace. And I've decided that grace is no more than giving somebody a break. We just need a break. Just give me a little break. You don't know me, you won't see me again, but if you just slow down and let me in, you've given me a break. We live in a graceless world. Unfortunately, we've lost the art of grace. My son went up to school in New York City in his first year at NYU when he's living in the city, and I go to visit him, and a homeless man is there, and he has his hand out, and I go in my purse, and Nick says, "Mom, don't look at him, don't look at him." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Mom, if you look at him, then you have to be committed." So you just don't make eye contact. And isn't that a little sad that that would be my child's way of survival in the world. But that happens on the Jamaica way. If I look at you, I may have to commit to you. Television news is not a grace-filled occupation. I was in television for probably 135 years in Boston. And I remember that there was no grace in television. Television is to show you what the world is all about. We are to take a removed and subjective look at the world, and that is what we do. But you know what happened to me back in 2001? I went on this story to cover these people in Sudan, and this objective, removed angle that I had no longer worked. It was sort of like when Katrina hit, and all the reporters are flying around in helicopters, and the people down in New Orleans and down in Louisiana are on their roofs, and they have a white flag, and they're asking for help, and the reporter is just reporting on that. And at some point in your life, if you are open to the universe, you will have to step across that line from that removed observance to get involved. You will have to express some grace. And so Sudan was my grace-filled experience, being in a part of the world where people were dying and people were living very much on the margins of life, and villages had been burned. I don't know how much you know about Sudan, but South Sudan is now the world's newest country. But it was a new country born of conflict and death and destruction. And all they know in this part of the world is war. And so we go there with a group of Bostonians who want to do something about it. And I was fascinated that people actually believe they could make a difference in the world. I could tell the story, but what more can you do? This is an intractable problem. This is a war that's been going on for generations. What could we possibly do to make a difference? But I realized that the people I was with knew what grace was about. And one in particular, Reverend Dr. Gloria White Hammond, who is my shero in the world. She is a pediatrician, she is a minister, she is an activist. She said, not only are we going to do something, we have a responsibility to do something, because this is our world, and these people belong to us. And so I looked at her and thought, well, if she's going to try, I guess I'm going to hang in here with her and see what happens. And you listen to people tell you stories about war, people tell you stories about rape, people tell you stories that you just don't even want to believe. And you realize maybe there's something I can do. Maybe there's something I can do, just a little bit, something different, just a little bit more that would make a difference in somebody's life. One of my first experiences on the ground in Sudan was taking pictures of the villages there. This is a place where there's no infrastructure, there's no hospitals, there's no hotels, there's nothing. This is in the bush, not in the cities. This is out in the bush, and people have very little. They live off the land, and their homes have been bombed, and villages have been destroyed. And I'm taking pictures of all of this, and it's just mind-blowing what I've seen, because I've not been to this part of the world before. And I go up into a tukul area, a compound area, where a bunch of huts are there, and there's a woman who's pounding on grain. And I want to get a picture of this woman doing her work, and I accidentally step on a bowl of the grain that she's made as her pounding. And it was told me later, there was nothing I could do except for I'm sorry, that I had destroyed her all-day work. She had been pounding this grain all day long. She had been pounding to take care of her children. And I was trying to do something good and actually messed it up. And I couldn't figure out what to do. And she was very gracious to me. She said nothing. But I thought, what she must think of me. We need to remember that we have the personal, intimate ability to show grace to our neighbors. I was probably 6 or 7 years old when Dr. Martin Luther King came to Little Rock, Arkansas to preach. My father was a preacher, and my father took me and my brother everywhere he went. My mother died when I was born, and so my dad was a widower, so he was poor and he didn't have any babysitters, so the church was my babysitter. And I went to more funerals, weddings, and prayer meetings before I was 12 than most people have gone to in a lifetime. And I said, I'll never be a preacher. Oh no, that would never be what I do. But this time we were going to hear Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he was in a church, and he was just coming off the successful Montgomery bus boycott. This was in the 50s, and he hadn't even begun the civil rights movement. He hadn't even begun to go into demonstrations, and he was trying to make a decision, I have since read, what to do, what was the next step. Taylor Branch has written an amazing set of books. One is called Pillar of Fire, and he said that King would have stayed in the pulpit at this point because he didn't know where to go. But there was history had set in motion a movement, you see, and young people, just like the young people here, were already protesting at the lunch counters, and they were demanding change in the world. And people were telling Dr. King, no, you stay in the pulpit because that's where you're better. You stay there, that's your comfort zone. But the young people were saying, no, Dr. King, you have to come out here in the streets because this is where this movement is going. And Dr. King had to make a decision on what he was going to do, and Branch says it was a choice between retreating to his comfort zone or going over a historical cliff. And Dr. King chose the latter, and the world was changed. But my theory is that while Dr. King studied Marxism and certainly studied socialism and certainly studied Gandhi, this decision to go off the proverbial cliff, this decision to step out of his comfort zone was a decision of the heart. I thoroughly believe that it was a decision of the heart. And the reason I believe this is because when he talked about nonviolent resistance, he was talking to church folks, really. That was the beginning of the movement. These were poor people. These were my hairdresser and the porter who lived down the street and the woman who was a maid around the corner. These were just ordinary people that Dr. King inspired to do extraordinary things based on grace. Because you see, what King was saying is you could stand up in front of that sheriff who's going to spit on you and call you names and put dogs on you, and what I want you to do is forgive that sheriff before you even stand there. And you can love that sheriff, not because you want something from him, but because he needs that. It was an extraordinary time. And you know what? For a few moments in history, it worked. It absolutely worked. And then they were singing, "We Shall Overcome" in China. And they were singing, "We Shall Overcome" in the Berlin Wall. And the whole world was changed based on grace. Oh, I think it was grace. And it wasn't just King. In 1990, the first act of the new East German government was to beg for forgiveness for all of the slaughter of all of the Jews. And they begged for forgiveness, and the forgiveness was given. And the fact that Israel and Germany have any relations at all is grace. There's no other reason to explain it. And you look at the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and you wonder how people could be treated so badly and be left widows and left without their children and have seen their children. There was grace that helped South Africa reconcile unto itself. Martin Luther King said, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, a single garment of destiny." And the word there is caught. Oh no, we didn't plan it, but this is the way the world is. And if we don't start showing some forgiveness to somebody, oh, we're going to be messed up. we are going to be messed up. So I am on my own little movement to show grace. And every time I can be allowed in on the Jamaica way, I know it's changing. It's changing slowly. People in Sudan, and I'm not talking about the politicians, and I'm not talking about the military leaders, and I'm not talking about those in charge. I'm talking about the women and children who are just trying to survive like you and I, are the most gracious people I've ever met. I'm not going to romanticize the situation in Sudan. It is ugly. It is poverty. It is oppression. It is classism. It is a religious war. It is ugly. But at the core are people who are willing to be gracious. And it's because of them that my life was changed. Because I figure if people who can live in the midst of death but still know how to live day in and day out, then I can make it. If people who have been treated as badly as these people have been treated but still offer hospitality, then I can do a little hospitality. I believe in grace. I believe we can practice grace. It is an intimate practice. It is not a movement. It is not a political leaning. It's just something you do, giving the other a break. And maybe he or she won't be the other. So here's the last part of this little speech I wanted to make. One of the trips we made to Sudan, Gloria and I, and we made countless trips in the 10-year period that we were traveling there. We ended up building a girls' school with the help of many of you in this community. And the Kanyak Girls' School opened in 2007 to 1,000 girls. So I want to tell you. And I say that sincerely when I say thanks to you. Brookline High School, people in this community had fundraisers for us and helped us do it, and the school is still open. So that was what we did for Sudan, and I'm very humbled about that. But here's what Sudan did for me. One of the trips we went there, we lost our luggage somewhere between Chicago and Nairobi. I have no idea. You get off the plane in Nairobi, Kenya, and all your luggage is gone. Now let me explain. To go into the village in South Sudan, the village of Akan, which was our community where we made our relationships and where we ended up building the school, you have to take everything in with you. You take in tents because you have to sleep on the ground. You take in water. You take in everything because this is a place that has been devastated by war. So we get all the way into Nairobi, Kenya, and we realize that we have nothing. And Gloria, I say, well, let's go back home then, shoot. I don't have no food, I don't have any makeup, for God's sake. How can I go in here and tell a story and do anything without makeup? And Gloria says, let's go in, because we've come this far. And so we go into a little store in Nairobi, and we bought some T-shirts, I think, maybe, and we bought some kind of covering, but just very basic stuff, because we had to catch a charter plane. There was a 4-hour flight into the bush, into this village. Somehow the word had gotten to this village. Now remember, this is the village that has nothing. We're there to help them. That somehow the word got to this village that the 2 women from Boston were coming, who were helping us, but they've lost everything, so the villagers knew the news. So the plane lands on the tarmac, not really the tarmac, just on the ground. And the people from the village come out to meet us. And if I ever write the book, this will be the movie that'll come out of it. They come to the plane, and the women carry brightly colored wraps, their clothes. Now they have nothing, but they have wraps to give us. And the men have built 2 hand-hewn cots. Now, this is a community where there's very little wood, but they have heard that we didn't have anything, so they built us cots on which to sleep. And the old women brought us pots of okra and goat meat that they chopped up, and they were giving us the food. And the little children even brought us sticks where we could brush our teeth. They have these sticks you can use. And it dawned on me that we had gone to Africa to save Sudan. And Sudan saved us. So I want you to know that one of the benefits of grace is what I call spiritual reciprocity. It is a law of any religion, any tradition, that what you give out comes back. And it is true as any truth you will ever hear. Practice grace. God bless you, and thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Walker. Your resounding message is motivational to us all. Maybe we can all walk with such grace at one time. Thank you for the words. It was quite empowering, quite motivational for all of us. And so, as we continue on the celebration, we call upon our children to continue the path. Please welcome the testosterone or the T-tones, who will perform I Can See Clearly Now by Johnny Nash and Can't Take My Eyes Off of You by Frankie Valli.
Hi, everybody. This is wonderful. We're the Testostones. We're also a little bit diminished, but we're glad to be singing. So, yeah, this is Can't Take My Eyes Off of You.
I can see clearly now, the rain has gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be bright, bright, sunshiny day. I think I can make it now. The pain has gone. All of the bad feelings have disappeared. Here is the rainbow I've been waiting for. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. Oh, it's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. Look all around, there's nothing but blue skies. Look straight ahead, there's nothing but blue skies. can see clearly now, the rain is gone. Oh, I can see all obstacles in my way, and gone all the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, oh, it's gonna be a bright, yeah, it's gonna be a bright, sunshiny day. Just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You feel like heaven's too much. I wanna hold you so much. At long last, love has arrived, and I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you.
And pardon the way that I stare, but there's nothing else that compares. The sight of you leaves me weak. There are no words left to speak. So if you feel how I feel, oh please let me know that it's real. Cause you're just too good to be true. I can't take my eyes off of you.
I love you, baby, and if it's quite alright, I need you, baby, to warm a lonely night. I love you, baby, trust in me when I say, oh pretty baby, bring me down, I pray. Oh pretty baby, now that I found you, stay and let me love you, baby, let me love you. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You feel like heaven to touch, and I wanna hold you so much. How long that love has arrived, and I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. I can't take my eyes off of you. I love you, baby, and if it's quite alright, I need you, baby, to warm a lonely night. I love you, baby, trust in me when I say, I need you, baby, don't bring me down, I pray. Oh pretty baby, now that I found you, stay and let me love you, baby, let me love you.
What fantastic voices we have in the music program. I've been so impressed this afternoon. We have more to come. At this time, we call to focus upon more of our sojourners to reflect words from the movement and people who also reflected upon the movement. This time in particular around economic justice. It was important to remember Dr. King's dream and sitting at the table of brotherhood. Most forget about his call for the equal playing field with the poor people's movement and his final visits to protest the poor treatment and pay of Memphis sanitation workers. Again, pay attention to the graphic on the screen as words are read by Tahira Salik and Royale Sangika Hall, reading the words of Dr. King and Julian Bond.
When the Constitution was written, it declared that the Negro was 60% of a person. Today, another formula seems to declare that he's 50% of a person. Of the good things in life, the Negro is approximately 1/2 of those of whites. That's Negroes have half the income of whites, and half of all Negroes live in a substandard housing. Of the negative experiences of life, the Negro has a double share. There are twice as many unemployed among Negroes, and the rate of infant mortality is double that of whites. I am not saying that we have a pure black and white conflict. Negroes are not the only ones only poor in the nation. There are nearly twice as many white poor as Negro, and therefore the struggle against poverty is not involved solely with color or racial discrimination. The problem is economic injustice, the great gulf between inordinate wealth and abject poverty. In America, 1% of population control 50% of wealth. Do you know the most of the poor people in our country are working every day? Those are the lowest economic level, the poor white, the Negro, the age, stagnate or become even poorer in relation to the larger society. Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires a tireless exertion to passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Let us continue our triumph march to the realization of American dream. Let us march on segregated housing until Negroes and whites live side by side in decent, safe, and sanitary housing. Let us march on to poverty until no American parent has to skip a meal so that his children may eat. Until no one walks in the streets of our cities and towns in search for jobs that do not exist. History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of the period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people.
Today, most school children know King fought for integration in Montgomery and he spoke in Washington of his dream. They do not know that until his life's end, he fought for economic justice and against the racism that survived the laws the movement won. King said, "I'm much more than a civil rights leader. There must be a better distribution of wealth. We can't have a system where some people live in superfluous, inordinate wealth, while others live in abject, deadening poverty." This is why Martin Luther King went to Memphis, Tennessee in 1968, where sanitation workers were paid so poorly that many of them qualified for and received public assistance. When unsafe working conditions led to the deaths of several of those workers, King went to Memphis to support their cause. The success of the American civil rights movement should be measured not by the increase in black millionaires since the 1960s, but by the decrease in black unemployment. The war on poverty has been replaced by a war on the poor, supporting tax cuts for the wealthy while cutting dozens of programs aimed at helping the disenfranchised. We must never forget that he died in Memphis, defending the collective bargaining rights of the sanitation workers. Today, as we remember and celebrate MLK, we must remember that we have realized only half of his dream.
And thank you for that impactful reading. And hopefully you're able to match that with the graphic that was up on the screen as we see some growth with unemployment, but also some of the same discrepancies from a long course of time. The talented young people of our town teach us with their example of excellence. And we'll continue to witness that with the last a cappella group, Perfect Pitch. They will come up to perform I Smile by Kirk Franklin and the 19th century spiritual Wayfaring Stranger. I do want to note in your program there is one omission. Unlike the other groups which were dealing with illness, one young lady was left off. Clara Martin is here to help with all the other young ladies. Perfect Pitch.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger, a traveling through this world alone. But there is no sickness, toil or danger in that bright land to which I go. And I'm going there to see my mother. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home now.
And I know dark clouds will gather me, and I know my way is rough and steep, and the beautiful fields lie just beyond me, and I know my way is rough and steep, and I'm going there to see my mother, and I'm going there.
Wayfaring stranger, traveling through this world alone, and there is no sickness, toil or danger in that bright land to which I go. And I'm going there to see my mother, and I'm going there, no more to roam. And I'm only going over Jordan, and I'm only going over home now. I'm going there to see my mother. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home.
Thank all of the a cappella groups for such wonderful renditions. We'll have a chance to hear from all of our singers at the end of the program, which should bring warmth to us as we walk away from this day. This leads us to our final readers. And these two, as well as Catherine, who helped us out earlier, are going on this year's trip, this year's sojourn to the past. There are other students around who are here today, as well as the trip leaders, and they're raising money and handing out informational flyers about the trip, as well as a fundraiser coming up soon. This year, Brookline High School will send its largest group of sojourners to the past. 17 young people will become intimate with the promise and the struggle of civil rights. Today, T.T. Adams and Ina Ming will read the words of Barack Obama, Barbara Jordan, and words from various news sources as we close out our reading part of the program. T.T., Ina.
We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied.
While Martin Luther King lived, he was reviled at least as much as he was celebrated. He endured arrest, prison, and constant threats to his life until he finally inspired our nation to transform itself and begin to live up to the meaning of its creed. What is the purpose that has always set this country apart? That through hard work and sacrifice, each of us can pursue our individual dreams, but still come together to ensure that the next generation can pursue their dreams as well. It is the promise that government should ensure opportunity, not just for those with the most money and influence, but for every American who's willing to work. The path to a more perfect union means acknowledging that what ails the African American community does not exist just in the minds of Black people, that the legacy of discrimination and current incidents of discrimination are real and must be addressed.
"50 years after the March on Washington, despite improvements in some areas, we have not yet kept the promise, and in fact, in other areas, we are losing ground. In 1960, low-income Latino and Black families were 3 times as likely as whites to live in high-poverty neighborhoods. 50 years later, low-income Latinos and Blacks were 6 to 7 times as likely as whites to live in such neighborhoods, and thus more likely not to have access to quality schools, housing, healthcare, and affordable consumer credit. 50 years later, twice as many Blacks as whites were unemployed, and while 3/4 of whites own their own homes, fewer than half of Hispanics and Blacks do. Decent employment and housing pave the road out of poverty. Yet racial discrimination persists, with equally qualified candidates for jobs and housing offered or denied opportunities depending on their race. 50 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court made the law unenforceable by removing the requirement to pre-clear proposed changes of voting procedures in states with a history of denying the vote to Blacks. Of more than 1.5 million prisoners in U.S. jails, 38% were Black, although Blacks comprise less than 13% of the population, an increase of about 300% from 30 years ago. And even with similar crimes and criminal records, minorities are imprisoned more often than whites, receive longer sentences, and are more likely to have the death penalty imposed.
As a nation, we can try to fulfill the promise of America, to create and sustain a society in which all of us are equal, to build a future founded on the belief that the gap between the promise and reality of America can one day be finally closed, if each of us remembers that we share a common destiny. As a nation, we must continue to try to live up to our historical promises, and foremost of them is the promise of equality of opportunity. What the people want is simple. They want an America as good as its promise. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. As we come to the end of our program, and remember, I'm blown away by a few things, but one of my memories, especially growing up in Brookline, was the distinct names my parents had chosen to give their children after African Americans we could be proud of knowing and emulating. My sister's name is Maya. The great Maya Angelou once said that it is imperative that young people be told that we have come a long way. Otherwise, they're likely to become cynical. A cynical young person has gone from knowing nothing to believing in nothing. In this day of remembrance, we revisit the lessons of one of our greatest teachers, one of our greatest ambassadors, and one of our greatest Americans. Dr. King's faith in people of all hues and beliefs made us all better people and created a better society than the one he lived in. Thank you for sharing in the day of recognition of a man who shaped us all and all that we do. It is that same faith that makes young minds want to see those who fought for the equality of all. It is that faith that motivates Reverend Walker's activism in Boston as well as the many corners of the earth. It is that faith that makes our children sing like angels and the town believe that we need to celebrate Dr. King every year, every month, every day. We like to take time and to be gracious and thank the Coolidge Corner Theater for all that they have done. Again, always dedicated to community. We'd like to thank all of the participants in today's program. Our keynote speaker, Reverend Liz Walker. We'd like to take time to thank the town of Brookline, who commits to this program and works to make it purposeful for all its residents in the midst of many towns who don't offer or provide such programs, and those who truly think of it as a day off for their residents, except for the few. Brookline has made this a point that at least once a year we will take time to reflect on how to make ourselves better, and we should take time out to thank the town of Brookline. And something that's become sort of a tradition here that was suggested to me, Ms. Bobby Nabel and certainly Jesse Mermel and others who work so intimately with this, we'd also like to take time for those who fought in the name of equality, those before I was born who allowed a kid like me to go to Brookline, to live in Brookline. Before, during, and after the golden age of civil rights movement, if you marched, protested in any of the possible ways that so many people worked to shake this earth, please stand and be recognized by us. We are in honor of you today as well. As we come to conclusion, I want to point to your programs that on page 7, the song lyrics for This Little Light of Mine are there. We'd like to ask the 3 a cappella groups to lead us in the singing of this song as we conclude our program. Before they do, I'd like to thank you all for coming out today on this afternoon. You could have easily sat and wallowed about the Patriots, but instead you came out. I hope this is more uplifting than yesterday afternoon was. But I sincerely hope you leave inspired to carry the promise and the struggle in which we honor Dr. King this year and annually. Thank you for coming. Notify. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine. Thank you again. Have a great evening. See you all next year. Thank you.